The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky hills of Montana when the sky began to burn. Jake Morrison crouched behind a fallen tree, watching the alien ships descend like silver teardrops from the heavens. Their hulls gleamed with an otherworldly light that made his eyes water. The sound they made was not like any aircraft he had ever heard. It was a deep, thrumming noise that seemed to shake the very ground beneath his boots. Jake was 28, years old, a lieutenant in the 3rd Marine Division. He had brown hair that was always a bit too long for regulation, and calloused hands that spoke of years working construction before he joined the military. His hometown of Detroit had taught him that sometimes you had to fight for what mattered. Today, what mattered was Earth. The alien invasion had begun 3 days ago. Cities around the world reported the same thing, massive ships appearing without. Warning, strange beings with scales and claws demanding surrender. The news called them the Zephyrian Empire. Jake just called them trouble. His unit had been stationed at a remote outpost in the mountains, tasked with monitoring enemy movements. It was supposed to be a safe assignment. That plan had gone to hell quickly when the aliens found them. "Morrison, you need to move," Sergeant Bill Murphy shouted from across the clearing. "We're pulling back to the caves." Jake nodded and started to run. The alien weapons made no sound when they fired, but he could see their blue energy beams cutting through the air. Where they hit the ground, the earth turned to glass. Where they hit trees, the wood simply vanished. He was halfway to the cave entrance when something massive dropped from the sky behind him. Jake turned and saw his first Zephyrian up close. The creature stood nearly 8 feet tall, with dark green scales that seemed to absorb light. Its eyes were yellow with black slits, like a snake's. It carried a weapon that looked like it had been grown rather than built. The alien raised its weapon toward Murphy. Without thinking, Jake threw himself sideways, knocking the sergeant out of the way. The energy beam passed through the space where Murphy had been standing, leaving a smoking hole in the rock wall behind them. "Go!" Jake yelled, pushing Murphy toward the cave. "I'll hold them off." It was a stupid thing to say. Jake had an old rifle that fired metal bullets, and the alien had a gun that could turn matter into nothing. But sometimes stupid was all you had. The Zephyrian turned its attention to Jake. It made a sound that might have been laughter, a harsh clicking noise that came from somewhere deep in its throat. It said something in its own language, words that sounded like gravel being poured into a blender. Jake aimed his rifle and fired. The bullet struck the alien's chest, but bounced off its scales like it had hit armor. The creature clicked again, sounding almost amused. More aliens were landing now. Jake could see them through the trees, moving with a purpose that spoke of military training. They were surrounding the area, cutting off all escape routes. His unit was trapped. "Human," the first alien said, and Jake was surprised that it could speak English. Its voice was deep and rough, like rocks grinding together. "You are brave, but foolish. Your weapons cannot harm us." Jake kept his rifle trained on the creature. "Maybe not, but I'm going to keep trying." The alien tilted its head, studying Jake with those yellow eyes. "You fight for a lost cause. Your world will belong to the Zephyrian Empire. General Vexthara has decreed it." "Never heard of him," Jake said, "but he sounds like a real piece of work." The alien made that clicking sound again. "You'll meet him soon. He is curious about your species. You show courage, even in defeat. This is unusual among prey animals." Jake didn't like being called a prey animal, but he had bigger problems. He could hear his unit retreating deeper into the caves behind him. If he could buy them a few more minutes, maybe they could find another way out. "Your friends have abandoned you," the alien continued. "Surrender now, and your death will be quick." "Thanks, but I'll pass," Jake said. He fired again, this time aiming for the creature's face. The bullet struck its forehead and ricocheted off, leaving only a small scratch. The alien seemed to grow. Tired of the conversation, it raised its weapon and fired. Jake dove to the side, but the beam caught his leg. Pain exploded through his body as the energy weapon burned through his uniform and into his flesh. He hit the ground hard, his rifle. Skittering away across the rocks. Jake tried to stand, but his wounded leg wouldn't support his weight. The alien approached slowly, confidently. It knew he was finished. "You fought well for a primitive creature," the alien said. "General Vexthara will be pleased to study you." 2 more aliens emerged from the forest. They were carrying strange devices that looked like metal nets. Jake realized they weren't here to kill him. They were here to capture him. Why? Jake asked, gritting his teeth against the pain. "What does your general want with me?" The first alien knelt beside him, its yellow eyes studying his face. "Humans are a mystery to us. You are weak, yet you fight. You are small, yet you show no fear. The general wishes to understand this contradiction before we destroy your world." The other aliens threw the metal net over Jake as soon as it touched his skin. He felt a strange tingling sensation. His muscles began to relax against his will. Some kind of paralysis weapon. "Do not struggle," the alien advised. "The neural dampener will make this easier." Jake wanted to struggle anyway, but his body wouldn't obey him. He could only watch as the aliens lifted him up and carried him toward a small landing craft that had appeared at the edge of the clearing dot as they loaded him into the ship. Jake caught a glimpse of the cave entrance. He hoped his unit had made it out. Someone needed to report what had happened here. Someone needed to warn Earth about what was coming. The inside of the alien ship was like nothing Jake had ever seen. The walls seemed to be made of some kind of living metal that pulsed with soft blue light. The air tasted different, thinner somehow, with a metallic tang that made his throat burn. The first alien, who seemed to be in charge, spoke into a device that looked like a piece of coral. Jake couldn't understand the words, but he caught one that sounded familiar. Vexthara. The alien finished its report and turned back to Jake. "You should feel honored, human. Few prisoners are brought before the general personally. Most are processed by subordinates." "Lucky me," Jake muttered, though the neural dampener made it hard to speak clearly. The alien made that clicking sound again. "Your attitude will not serve you well with General Vexthara. He does not appreciate sarcasm from inferior species." Jake wanted to tell the alien what he thought about being called inferior, but the paralysis was getting stronger. His eyelids felt heavy, and the world began to blur around the edges. As consciousness faded, Jake's last thought was of his sister Katie, back in Detroit. She taught kindergarten and always said that even the toughest kids could be reached if you understood what made them tick. Jake wondered if the same was true for alien generals. He had a feeling he was about to find out. Jake woke up in a cell that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of black stone. The walls were smooth and featureless, with no visible door or window. A soft blue light came from somewhere above, though he couldn't see its source. The air was warm and humid, like being inside a greenhouse. His leg still hurt from the energy weapon, but someone had bandaged it while he was unconscious. The bandage was made of some kind of flexible metal that seemed to move and adjust on its own. It was probably more advanced than anything Earth's doctors had, but that didn't make Jake feel better about his situation. He sat up slowly, testing his muscles. The paralysis had worn off, which was good. He could move, think, and plan. That was more than he'd had when they captured him. The cell was about 10 feet square, with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness. In one corner, there was a small alcove with what looked like a toilet, though it was shaped wrong for human anatomy. In another corner A thin stream of water fell from the ceiling into a shallow basin. The water was clear and tasteless when Jake cupped some in his hands. He was examining the walls for any weakness when a section of the black stone simply vanished. Where there had been solid wall, now there was an opening. Jake tensed, ready to fight or run, but neither option seemed likely to succeed. The alien who entered was different from the soldiers who had captured him. This one was taller, with darker scales and golden bands around its arms. Its eyes were the same yellow color, but they held an intelligence that made Jake's skin crawl. "You are awake," the alien said in perfect English. "Good. I am Commander Zarthik. I serve General Vexthara." Jake stood up, keeping his back to the wall. "Congratulations. You want a medal?" The alien's head tilted slightly. "You show no fear. This is interesting. Most captured beings cower when they first see a Zephyrian. Maybe I'm not most beings," Jake said. "Indeed. That is why the General wishes to speak with you personally." Zarthik gestured toward the opening. "You will come with me." Jake didn't move. "What if I don't want to?" "Then you will be dragged. The choice is yours, but the outcome is the same." Jake considered his options. Fighting was pointless. Running was impossible. But going willingly might give him a chance to learn something useful. "Lead the way." The corridors of the alien ship were as strange as Jake's cell. The walls curved and flowed like they were alive, and the floor felt soft under his feet. Doors opened and closed without any visible mechanism. Other aliens moved. Through the halls, all of them tall and scaled, all of them carrying weapons that looked like living things. Some of them stopped to stare at Jake as he passed. He heard them talking in their clicking language, though he couldn't understand the words. From their tone, he guessed they were discussing him like he was some kind of zoo animal. "Your species is famous throughout the galaxy," Zarthik said as they walked. "Not for your strength or intelligence, but for your stubbornness. You fight even when you cannot win." "Is that supposed to be a bad thing?" Jake asked. "It is inefficient. Resources wasted on hopeless causes could be better used elsewhere." Jake thought about that. "Maybe we just define winning differently than you do." The alien made a sound that might have been laughter. "You will have a chance to explain that to General Vexthara." They took a lift that moved sideways as much as up, traveling through sections of the ship that Jake tried to memorize. If he ever got a chance to escape, he'd need to know the layout. The ship was huge, much larger than it had looked from the outside. It was like a floating city, with thousands of aliens going about their business. Finally, they stopped at a door that was larger than the others. It was made of the same black stone as Jake's cell, but this one had symbols carved into its surface. The symbols seemed to move when Jake wasn't looking directly at them. "You will show respect to the General," Zarthik said. "He is the conqueror of 17 worlds. He has never failed in a military campaign." "Sounds like a real overachiever," Jake said. The door vanished, revealing a chamber that took Jake's breath away. The room was enormous, with a ceiling that rose up into darkness. The walls were covered in what looked like trophies from a dozen different worlds. Weapons, armor, and strange artifacts that Jake couldn't identify were displayed like the belongings of conquered peoples. At the center of the room stood General Vexthara. He was the largest Zephyrian Jake had seen, standing nearly 9 feet tall. His scales were black with silver patterns that seemed to shift and change as he moved. His eyes were not yellow like the others, but a deep red that seemed to glow in the dim light. He wore no armor, but his body looked like it was made of living metal. "So," the general said, his voice deep enough to make Jake's chest vibrate, "this is a human." Jake met his gaze without flinching. "And you're the famous General Vexthara. I've heard so much about you." The general moved closer, studying Jake like he was a specimen under a microscope. "You are smaller than I expected, weaker, yet you do not cower in my presence. Explain this. Not much to explain, Jake said. I'm not easily impressed. Vexthara made a sound that was definitely laughter, but it was not pleasant. Your world is about to be destroyed. Your species will be enslaved or eliminated. Yet you stand before me making jokes. Are all humans so foolish? Some more than others, Jake admitted, but we're a pretty stubborn bunch. Indeed, that is why you interest me. The general began to circle Jake slowly. I have conquered many worlds, human. I have faced warriors who could tear you apart with their bare hands. I have broken the will of beings who lived for thousands of years. Yet none of them showed the peculiar defiance that your species displays. Jake turned to keep the general in sight. Maybe you just haven't been trying hard enough. Vexthara stopped circling and stared at Jake directly. You think you can resist me? You think your primitive mind can withstand what I will do to you? I think you're about to find out, Jake said. The general gestured to Zarthik, who brought forward a chair that looked like it had been grown from the same black stone as the walls. Strange devices extended from its arms and back, devices that hummed with barely contained energy. This is a neural probe, Vexthara explained. It will read your thoughts, your memories, your fears. It will show me everything about your species that I need to know to defeat you. Jake looked at the chair and felt his stomach tighten, but he kept his voice steady. Looks uncomfortable. It is, extremely so, but it is also thorough. When I am finished, I will know everything about human psychology, human tactics, human weaknesses. Your world will fall within days. And if I don't cooperate? Vexthara smiled, showing teeth like obsidian daggers. You will cooperate. The probe does not require your consent. It simply takes what it needs. They strapped Jake into the chair, using restraints that adjusted themselves to his body. The devices attached to his head with a gentle touch that somehow felt more threatening than violence would have been. Begin, Vexthara commanded. Pain exploded through Jake's skull as the neural probe activated. It felt like someone was driving nails into his brain while simultaneously setting his thoughts on fire. He gritted his teeth and tried to think about nothing, but the probe was relentless. Images flashed through his mind. His childhood in Detroit, his sister Katie teaching her kindergarten class, his years working construction, his military training. The probe took it all, sorting through his memories like files in a cabinet. But Jake had been through worse. Boot camp, combat training, the day his father died. Pain was just another enemy to be faced and defeated. He focused on his breathing, on staying calm, on not giving the aliens the satisfaction of seeing him break. Remarkable, Vexthara murmured, watching displays that Jake couldn't see. Your mind is crude, but it has an unusual structure. You compartmentalize pain, separate it from function. This is not common among lower species. The probe dug deeper, looking for breaking points. Jake felt it pushing against his defenses, trying to crack his mental barriers. But he had learned something important from his sister Katie. Sometimes, the best way to handle a bully was to not give them the reaction they wanted, so Jake began to hum. It was an old song his mother had sung to him when he was young, something about sunshine and rainbows. He couldn't remember all the words, but the melody was still clear in his mind. The probe faltered. The pain lessened slightly as the device tried to understand what it was encountering. Jake kept humming, focusing on the simple tune instead of the agony in his head. Interesting, Vexthara said. You are using music as a mental shield. Primitive but effective. Jake smiled through the pain. We're full of surprises. The general increased the probe's intensity. The pain came back stronger than before, but Jake kept humming. He thought about Katie's kindergarten class, about 5-year-olds who faced their fears with crayons and courage. If they could be brave, so could he. Hours passed. The probe took. everything it wanted from Jake's mind, but he never stopped humming. He gave them his memories, his training, his knowledge of human tactics. But he didn't give them his spirit. Finally, Vexthara shut off the machine. Jake slumped in the chair, exhausted but unbroken. "You have provided valuable information," the general said. "But you have also shown me something unexpected. Your species possesses a mental resilience that I had not anticipated." Jake looked up at him with tire. Jake had been in the cell for 3 days when they came for him again. This time, there were more guards, and they carried different weapons. Instead of the energy guns he'd seen before, these looked like they were designed to stun rather than kill. Commander Zarthik led them, but he looked troubled. "The general has decided to test you," he said as they walked through the corridors. "He wishes to see how humans perform under pressure." "What kind of test?" Jake asked. "You will see." They took a different route this time, deeper into the ship. The corridors here were darker, with a smell that reminded Jake of old gymnasiums and fear. They passed through several security checkpoints, each one more heavily guarded than the last. Finally, they arrived at a massive chamber that took Jake's breath away. It was like a coliseum, with rows of seats rising up into the darkness. But instead of sand on the floor, there was metal grating over what looked like a pit. The walls were covered in viewing screens that showed the chamber from every angle. General Vexthara was waiting in what was clearly the command section, surrounded by other high-ranking aliens. He looked down at Jake with those red eyes and smiled. "Human," his voice boomed through speakers in the walls. "You have claimed that your species is full of surprises. Today, we will test that claim." Jake stood in the center of the chamber, looking around at the seats that were filling with alien spectators. "What exactly am I supposed to be testing?" "Your survival instincts," Vexthara replied. "I have gathered beings from across the galaxy to witness this demonstration. They need to understand what we face when we conquer your world." A section of the floor opened, and something rose from the pit below. Jake's blood ran cold when he saw what it was. The creature stood 8 feet tall on 4 legs that ended in claws the size of dinner plates. Its body was covered in chitinous armor that looked like it could stop bullets. Its head was mostly mouth, filled with teeth that curved backward like fishhooks. Its eyes were black and soulless, and when it saw Jake, it made a sound like a chainsaw cutting through metal. "This is a Krillian hunter," Vexthara announced. "They are apex predators from the Krill system. One of these creatures can kill a dozen trained warriors from most species." The alien audience made appreciative noises, like they were watching a favorite gladiator about to perform. Jake noticed that some of them were placing what looked like bets. "You have no weapons," the general continued. "No armor. No allies. You have only what your species claims makes you special: your adaptability and your stubborn refusal to surrender." Jake looked at the creature, which was now circling him slowly. Its claws left deep scratches in the metal floor. "And if I win, you will face another opponent tomorrow, and another the day after that. This will continue until you die, or until I grow bored." "Great. And if I refuse to fight?" "Then you will die quickly instead of slowly. The choice is yours." Jake looked around. The chamber again. The walls were too high to climb, and the floor was solid metal, except for the pit the creature had come from. There was literally nowhere to run. The Krillian hunter finished its circle and crouched, preparing to spring. Jake had maybe 10 seconds. Before it attacked, he thought about his sister Katie and her kindergarten class. She had always taught her kids that the best way to handle a bully was to understand what they wanted. Bullies usually wanted to feel powerful, to dominate someone weaker. The trick was to not let them have that satisfaction. But this creature wasn't a bully. It was a predator, and predators wanted to kill. Understanding that wasn't going to help Jake survive, the Krillian hunter pounced. Jake dove to the side, rolling across the metal grating. The creature's claws scraped across the floor where he had been standing, leaving deep gouges in the metal. Jake came up running, trying to put distance between himself and the thing that wanted to eat him. The creature was fast, but Jake had learned something from watching it move. It was built for power, not agility. Its turns were wide, and it needed time to change direction. That gave Jake an advantage, but only a small one. He ran toward the wall, then turned sharply just before reaching it. The creature tried to follow, but its momentum carried it forward. It slammed into the wall with a sound like a car crash, and Jake heard some of the aliens gasp in surprise, but the impact barely seemed to faze the hunter. It turned toward Jake again, and this time it was angry. Its eyes had changed from black to red, and the sound it made was like breaking glass. Jake back toward the center of the chamber, his mind racing. The creature was stronger, faster, and better armed than he was, but it was also predictable. It attacked in straight lines, using brute force rather than strategy. The hunter charged again. This time, Jake waited until the last possible second before diving away. As the creature passed he grabbed one of its rear legs and held on. The beast tried to shake him off, but Jake's construction work had given him strong hands and a good grip. The creature spun in a circle, trying to reach Jake with its claws, but its anatomy worked against it. It couldn't bend far enough to attack something hanging onto its back leg. Jake held on grimly, his muscles burning from the effort. The alien audience was making excited noises now. Jake could hear Vexthara's voice over the speakers, but he couldn't understand the words. He was too focused on not getting killed. Creature tried a different approach. It reared up on its hind legs, then threw itself backward, trying to crush Jake against the floor. Jake let go just before impact, rolling away as the beast crashed down where he had been. Now the hunter was disoriented and on its side. Jake saw his chance. He jumped onto the creature's back, behind its head where its claws couldn't reach him. The beast thrashed wildly, but Jake held on, looking for something that might be a weak spot. There, at the base of the skull, was a gap in the armor. It was small, maybe the size of a quarter, but it was the only vulnerable spot Jake could see. He had no weapon, but he had something else, his bare hands and the desperation of a man who refused to die. Jake pressed his thumbs into the gap and pushed as hard as he could. The creature screamed, a sound that made Jake's ears ring. It bucked and twisted, trying to throw him off, but Jake held on and kept pressing. Finally, the Krillian hunter collapsed. Its breathing slowed, then stopped. Jake climbed off its back, his hands shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. The alien audience was silent for a moment, then erupted in what sounded like cheering. Jake looked up at General Vexthara, who was staring at him with an expression that might have been surprise. "Impressive," the general's voice boomed through the chamber. "You have survived longer than I expected." But this was only the beginning. Jake wiped the sweat from his forehead. "Bring on the next one." "Tomorrow," Vexthara said. "Today, you have earned a rest. Guards, return him to his cell." As they led Jake away, he caught sight of something that made his heart race. In the crowd of alien spectators, he saw other beings who didn't look like Zephyrians. They were prisoners too. He realized, captives from other worlds who had been brought here to watch him die, but something had changed in their expressions. Where before there had been hopelessness, now there was something that looked like hope. They had seen a human defeat a Krillian, hunter with nothing but his bare hands and his refusal to give up. Back in his cell, Jake lay on the hard floor and thought about what he had learned. The ship was full of prisoners from different worlds. They were all watching him, waiting to see if he would break. And General Vexthara was treating this like entertainment. bringing in spectators to watch humans die. But Jake had survived the first test, and in doing so, he had shown the other prisoners that the Zephyrians weren't invincible. Their creatures could be defeated. Their plans could be disrupted. Jake smiled in the darkness of his cell. The general thought he was learning about human weaknesses. But what he was really doing was showing human strengths to every prisoner on the ship. He was giving them hope, and hope was a dangerous thing to give to people who had nothing left to lose. Tomorrow, they would bring him another monster to fight. And Jake would fight it, not just for his own survival, but for every prisoner who was watching. He would show them that humans didn't give up, didn't surrender, and didn't accept defeat. The general had made a mistake. He thought he was demonstrating human weakness, but he was actually demonstrating human strength. And Jake was going to make sure that every prisoner on the ship learned that lesson. The next morning, they came for him again. This time, the chamber was even more crowded. Word had spread through the ship about the human who had killed a Krillian hunter, and everyone wanted to see what he would do next. Jake walked into the arena with his head held high. He had no idea what they were going to throw at him today, but he knew one thing for certain. He was going to fight, and he was going to win, because that's what humans did. They adapted, they survived, and they never, ever gave up. General Vexthara was about to learn that lesson the hard way. Jake had been fighting for 2 weeks now. Each day brought a new creature, a new test, a new chance to die. But each day he survived. The Krillian hunter had been followed by an acid-spitting plant thing from some swamp world. After that came a mechanical spider that shot laser beams from its eyes. Then a shapeshifter that could look like anything but couldn't change its smell. Each victory brought more spectators. The arena was packed now with aliens from dozens of different species. Some were Zephyrian soldiers, but many were prisoners. Like Jake, they came to watch the human who refused to die. Jake had learned to read the crowd. The prisoners watched him with growing hope, while the Zephyrians watched with growing concern. General Vexthara still acted like this was all entertainment. But Jake could see the frustration in those red eyes. Today felt different. As they led Jake to the arena, the guard seemed more tense than usual. Commander Zarthik walked beside him, and for the first time, the alien looked almost apologetic. "The general has decided to end this demonstration," Zarthik said quietly. "Today's opponent is not meant to test you. It is meant to kill you." Jake nodded. "I figured this was coming eventually. What am I facing? A void stalker. They are creatures of pure energy, impossible to kill with physical force. The general believes that even human stubbornness has limits." "We'll see about that," Jake said. The arena was more crowded than ever. Jake could see hundreds of faces in the stands, all watching him intently. In the prisoner section, he recognized some of the aliens he had seen before. There was a tall, blue-skinned woman who looked like she might have been a soldier on her home world. Near her sat a group of small, gray creatures with large eyes who whispered among themselves in a language that sounded like music. General Vexthara stood in his command box, looking down at Jake with satisfaction. "Human," his voice boomed. "You have provided us with much entertainment. But all shows must end." "Shame," Jake called back. "I was just getting warmed up." The floor opened, and something emerged that made Jake's blood run cold. The Void Stalker was like living shadow, a creature made of darkness that seemed to absorb light. It had no fixed shape, flowing and changing like smoke, but Jake could sense its hunger. It wanted to devour him, to add his life force to its own. "This creature feeds on life energy," Vexthara announced. "It cannot be harmed by physical attacks. It cannot be outrun. It cannot be reasoned with. It exists only to consume." The Void Stalker moved toward Jake like a wave of darkness. Where? It touched the metal floor, The metal began to corrode and crumble. Jake backed away, but there was nowhere to go. "Any last words, human?" the general asked. Jake looked up at him and smiled. "Yeah, you really don't understand us at all, do you?" The Void Stalker reached him. Jake felt its cold touch on his skin, and pain, like nothing he had ever experienced, shot through his body. The creature was literally eating his life force, draining away his strength and his will to live. But Jake didn't run. He didn't scream. Instead, he did something that no one expected. He laughed. "You know what the funny thing is?" Jake said, his voice echoing through the silent arena. "You think this is about me. You think this is about one human fighting your monsters." The Void Stalker paused, confused by Jake's reaction. Creatures usually screamed when it fed on them. They begged for mercy or tried to escape. They didn't laugh. "But it was never about me," Jake continued. "It was about them." He gestured toward the prisoner section, where hundreds of aliens were watching with growing amazement. "You wanted to show them that humans were weak. Instead, you showed them that humans don't give up. You showed them that your creatures can be beaten. You showed them that the mighty Zephyrian Empire can be defied." The Void Stalker tried to resume feeding, but something had changed. The creature drew its power from fear and despair. But Jake wasn't afraid anymore. He was angry. "You made one mistake, General," Jake said, his voice growing stronger despite the creature's attack. "You thought breaking me would break them. But humans don't work that way. We're pack animals. We fight for each other, not just for ourselves." In the prisoner section, the blue-skinned woman stood up. Then the gray creatures with the large eyes. Then more and more, until hundreds of aliens were on their feet, watching Jake face the Void Stalker without fear. "You see that?" Jake asked, pointing at the crowd. "That's not fear. That's hope. And hope is contagious." The Void Stalker was weakening. Without fear to feed on, it was losing its power. Jake could feel its grip on him loosening. "But you know what's really funny," Jake continued. "You brought me here to learn about humans. And you did learn something. You learned that we're stubborn. You learned that we don't give up. But you missed the most important thing about us." Jake reached out and grabbed the Void Stalker with his bare hands. The creature tried to pull away, but Jake held on tight. "We're not just stubborn," Jake said. "We're smart. And we've been watching you for 2 weeks, learning everything about your ship, your routines, your weaknesses." General Vexthara leaned forward in his command box. "What are you talking about?" Jake smiled. "I'm talking about the fact that your viewing screens are connected to the ship's main computer. I'm talking about the fact that the prisoner sections all have emergency lockdown overrides. I'm talking about the fact that every day you brought me here, I was memorizing the layout of this ship. The Void Stalker was fading now, its form becoming less solid as it lost the ability to feed on fear. Jake could see through it to the arena floor below. "You see, General, you made the same mistake that bullies always make. You assumed that because I was trapped, I was helpless. But humans are never helpless as long as we can think." Alarms began to sound throughout the ship. Red lights flashed in the arena, and Jake could hear the sound of distant explosions. General Vexthara spun toward his command consoles, his face twisted with rage and confusion. "What is happening?" he roared. Commander Zarthik was frantically working at a control panel. "The prisoner sections are in revolt, General. Somehow the lockdown systems have been disabled. The captives are breaking out of their cells." Jake felt the Void Stalker's grip on him disappear completely. The creature dissolved into wisps of shadow that faded away like smoke. He stood in the center of the arena, battered but alive, and looked up at the general with satisfaction. "How?" Vexthara demanded. "How did you do this?" "I didn't," Jake said. "They did. All those prisoners you brought here to watch me die. Turns out some of them are pretty smart too. Engineers, technicians, soldiers from a dozen different worlds. All they needed was hope and a distraction. The blue-skinned woman in the prisoner section had produced some kind of device from her. Clothing. She was working on a wall panel while the gray creatures with large eyes kept watch. Other prisoners were doing the same thing throughout the arena. You spent 2 weeks showing them that the Zephyrian Empire could be defied, Jake continued. You gave them time to study your ship, to plan, to organize. And you gave me time to talk to them. When? Vexthara snarled. You were always guarded. Jake laughed. Guards can be distracted. A coughing fit here. A stumble there. Amazing how much you can communicate with hand signals when you need to. Especially when some of your prisoners used to be military. More explosions echoed through the ship. The viewing screens showed chaos in the corridors as prisoners fought their way through surprised Zephyrian guards. They were using improvised weapons and captured alien technology, but more importantly, they were working together. The thing about hope, Jake said, is that it spreads. You show people that escape is possible, that their captors aren't invincible. And suddenly, everyone remembers how to fight. The arena floor began to shake as more explosions rocked the ship. Some of the alien spectators were trying to leave, but the exits were blocked by escaping prisoners. The Zephyrian guards were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. General Vexthara drew his sidearm and pointed it at Jake. You have destroyed everything. Not everything, Jake said calmly. Just your invasion plan. See, while your prisoners were learning about your ship's layout, I was learning about your military strategy. You put all your most dangerous captives on your flagship, all your best scientists, soldiers, and leaders from conquered worlds. You thought it was safer to keep them close. The general's hand was shaking with rage. You are one human. You cannot defeat the entire Zephyrian Empire. You're right, Jake agreed. I can't, but I'm not alone anymore. The blue-skinned woman had finished her work on the wall panel. Suddenly, the energy barriers that separated the prisoner sections from the arena floor disappeared. Hundreds of aliens poured onto the arena floor, surrounding Jake protectively. The woman approached Jake, moving with the confident stride of a soldier. I am Captain Lyra of the Centauri Defense Force, she said in accented but clear English. You have given us a great gift, human. You have given us hope. Just call me Jake, he said. And we're not done yet. This ship has communication arrays that can reach every Zephyrian vessel in the fleet. If we can take the command center, we can send a signal to Earth, warn them about the invasion. Captain Lyra nodded. My people are engineers. We can help with the technical aspects, but we will need to fight our way through the ship. Good thing we have soldiers from a dozen different worlds, Jake said, gesturing. The battle through the ship was like nothing Jake had ever experienced. The corridors that had seemed so alien and confusing when he was a prisoner now became familiar terrain as he and the escaped captives fought their way toward the command. Center. Captain Lyra had taken charge of the military aspects of their assault, organizing the former soldiers among the prisoners into effective fighting units. The gray creatures with large eyes turned out to be brilliant tacticians, able to predict Zephyrian movements and suggest ambush points. A group of crystalline beings from some distant world could interface directly with the ship's computer systems, shutting down security measures and opening locked doors. Jake found himself in the strange position of being both a leader and a student. These aliens had been fighting the Zephyrian Empire longer than Earth had even known it existed. They knew tactics and technologies that human military doctrine hadn't even dreamed of. But they looked to him for inspiration, for the stubborn, human refusal to accept defeat that had started this rebellion. The command center is 3 levels up, Captain Lyra reported as they paused in a junction between corridors. But the Zephyrians have sealed the main access routes. We'll have to go through the engineering sections. One of the gray tacticians, who Jake had learned was named Keeper Voss, chittered something in its musical language. Captain Lyra nodded and translated. Keeper Voss says the engineering route will take us past the ship's communication array. If we can access it, we can send a warning to Earth about the invasion fleet. Jake thought about Earth, about his sister Katie teaching her kindergarten class, about the billions of people who had no idea that alien warships were heading there. How long do we have? The main invasion force was scheduled to reach Earth in 6 days, Captain Lyra said. But General Vexthara may accelerate the timeline now that his flagship is compromised. They moved through the engineering sections, fighting past automated defenses and small groups of Zephyrian guards. The aliens had excellent training and superior weapons, but they were facing enemies who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Jake was amazed by how well the escaped prisoners worked together. Beings from dozens of different worlds, with completely different biologies and cultures, had formed into an effective fighting force in a matter of hours. They shared weapons, covered each other's weaknesses, and communicated despite language barriers. This is what the general never understood, Jake said to Captain Lyra as they climbed through a maintenance shaft toward the communication array. He thought conquering different worlds made him strong. But what really makes you strong is bringing different worlds together. Captain Lyra smiled, an expression that looked strange on her blue features, but somehow felt familiar. Humans have an interesting perspective on unity. Most species see differences as obstacles. You see them as opportunities. They reached the communication array chamber to find it heavily defended. A dozen Zephyrian soldiers had barricaded themselves. Inside, determined to prevent any signal from reaching Earth. But Jake and his allies had advantages the defenders didn't expect. The crystalline beings could disrupt the Zephyrians' energy weapons by interfering with their power cells. A group of insectoid creatures could crawl through ventilation shafts and attack from unexpected angles. The gray tacticians coordinated everything with military precision. The battle was fierce but brief. Within minutes, they had control of the communication array. But when they tried to send a message to Earth, they discovered a problem. The array is locked, reported one of the crystalline beings. It requires General Vexthara's personal authorization codes. Jake looked at the complex, alien control panel and felt a moment of despair. They had come so far, fought so hard, only to be stopped by a password they didn't know. Then he remembered something from his interrogation, something the neural probe had pulled from his mind. "Wait," he said. "During the probe session I saw some of the general's memories. The machine works both ways. Maybe I can remember his authorization codes." It was a long shot, but Jake closed his eyes and tried to recall the images that had flashed through his mind during the neural probe. There had been symbols, alien writing that meant nothing to him at the time. But now, looking at the communication array controls, some of those symbols looked familiar. "There," Jake said, pointing to a sequence of alien characters. "Try that combination." A crystalline being interfaced with the controls. For a moment, nothing happened, and the array came to life, its displays showing connection pathways reaching across space toward Earth. "It's working," Captain Lyra said. "We have a link to your planet's communication satellites." Jake leaned toward the transmission device. "This is Lieutenant Jake Morrison, 3rd Marine Division, to any Earth military command. The Zephyrian Empire invasion fleet is 6 days out from Earth. Repeat, alien invasion fleet inbound, 6 days to arrival. They have superior technology, but they underestimate human adaptability. Use that advantage. Do not surrender. Do not give up. Humanity can win this fight." He paused, thinking of Katie and her kindergarten class. Tell everyone that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and fighting anyway. Tell them that a human can beat a Krillian hunter with his bare hands if he's stubborn enough. Tell them that hope is contagious, and that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can give an enemy is proof that they're not invincible. Alarms began blaring throughout the ship. General Vexthara's voice echoed through the corridors, speaking in the Zephyrian language. The crystalline beings translated his words. "He's ordering all remaining forces to the command center," they reported. "He's going to destroy the ship rather than let us take it." Jake looked around at the faces of his alien allies. They had fought so hard to get this far, but if Vexthara destroyed the ship, they would all die. Unless, how long would it take? To reach the escape pods? Jake asked Captain Lyra checked a schematic of the ship. 20 minutes to the nearest pod bay. But there aren't enough pods for everyone. Then we don't all go, Jake said simply. Some of us get to the pods. The rest continue to the command center and stop Vexthara from destroying the ship. That's suicide, Captain Lyra protested. Whoever goes to the command center won't make it out alive, Jake smiled. Maybe, but they'll save everyone else. And sometimes that's what courage looks like. Keeper Voss chittered something in its musical language. Captain Lyra translated with surprise in her voice. Keeper Voss volunteers to lead the command center assault. The gray tacticians say it would be an honor to die alongside a human who taught them about hope. More volunteers stepped forward. The crystalline beings, the insectoid creatures, aliens. From a dozen different worlds. They all wanted to be part of the final assault, even knowing they might not survive. "No," Jake said firmly. "I started this rebellion. I'll finish it. The rest of you get to the escape pods." "You cannot fight General Vexthara alone," Captain Lyra argued. "I won't be alone," Jake said, thinking of Katie, of his unit back on Earth. Of all the humans who would soon be fighting for their world. "I'll have everyone worth fighting for with me." They split into two groups. Captain Lyra led most of the escaped prisoners toward the pod bays, while Jake and a small group of volunteers headed for the command center. As they parted ways, the blue-skinned captain caught Jake's arm. "Your species will survive this," she said with certainty. "And when they do, the galaxy will never be the same." Jake nodded. "Good. It's about time the galaxy met some humans." The final assault on the command center was a running battle through corridors filled with desperate Zephyrian soldiers. Jake's small group fought with the fury of people who knew they were humanity's last hope. They used every lesson Jake had learned from 2 weeks in the arena, every tactic the alien prisoners had taught him. Every ounce of stubborn human determination. Finally, they reached the command center doors. Jake could hear General Vexthara inside, giving orders to destroy the ship. In a few minutes, it would all be over. Jake looked at his remaining allies, Keeper Voss, 2 of the crystalline beings, and an insectoid warrior whose name he couldn't pronounce. They had come from different worlds, different species, different cultures. But they were united by something stronger than any of those differences. "Ready?" Jake asked. They nodded, each in their own way. Jake smiled and kicked open the door. "Let's go teach a general about the dangers of underestimating people." "General." Vexthara stood at the center of his command center, surrounded by the few loyal guards who remained. His red eyes blazed with fury when he saw Jake enter. "You!" The general snarled. "You have destroyed everything I built." "Not everything," Jake said calmly. "I've just given the galaxy a new perspective on what's possible." The final battle was about to begin. And Jake Morrison, construction worker from Detroit, was ready to show an alien general what it really meant to be human. The escape pods were launching from the ship, carrying Captain Lyra and the other prisoners to safety. Earth's military was receiving Jake's warning and preparing defenses. Across the galaxy, word would spread about the human who had sparked a rebellion that united dozens of species against their oppressors. But right now, in this command center, it was just Jake and his friends against a general who had seriously misjudged what won.